All right. Well, welcome to Insights at Questrom and our exciting panel discussion, where we will delve into the pros and cons of the recent antitrust case filed against Amazon. I'm Dionne Lomax, law lecturer in the Markets, Public Policy, and Law Department at Boston University's Questrom School of Business. Now, as many of you know, on September 26th, the FTC and 17 state attorneys general filed a 172-page complaint against Amazon, alleging that the company is a monopolist that uses anti-competitive and predatory strategies to illegally maintain its monopoly. The complaint alleges that Amazon has engaged in a course of exclusionary conduct that prevents current competitors from growing and new competitors from emerging. It alleges that Amazon has prevented rivals and third-party sellers from lowering prices, degraded quality for shoppers, overcharged third-party sellers, stifled innovation, and prevented rivals from fairly competing against Amazon. Plaintiffs assert that by stifling competition on price, product selection, and quality, and preventing current or future rivals from attracting a critical mass of shoppers and sellers, Amazon ensures that no current or future rival can threaten its dominance. So Amazon, as we all know, is one of the largest and most influential e-commerce and technology companies in the world. So it comes as no surprise that this case has garnered significant attention and sparks healthy debates. And so today I am excited that we are here with this distinguished panel of experts who will provide their insights into the pros and cons of key antitrust issues in this case. So we would love to have an active Q&A with all of you today in the audience. So I invite you to participate in the discussion by submitting your questions for today's panelists in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So our panel of experts here with me today include Andrei Hagiu, Associate Professor, Information Systems here at Questrom, Andrey Fradkin, Assistant Professor of Marketing here at Questrom, and Chiara Farronato, Associate Professor, Business Administration at Harvard Business School. So let's jump right in and tackle some of these key issues in the antitrust complaint. So first of all, let's start with pay-to-play advertising. So according to the complaint, Amazon allegedly made it difficult for third-party sellers to grow without buying ads in a program considered to be pay-to-play. So the complaint states that most sellers must now pay for advertising to reach Amazon's massive base of online shoppers, while shoppers face less relevant search results and are steered toward more expensive products. So Andrei Hagiu, let's start with you. What is your perspective on the pay-to-play issue? Is it a legitimate antitrust concern? And what are the pro-competitive benefits of this practice, if any?
Sure. So my first reaction when I saw the pay to play, I think we've all noticed this appear sometime. I can't remember, but sometime the last few years, it just became apparent that you go on Amazon, you search for something, and all of a sudden there's, instead of having just organic search results at the top for the product you're looking for, at some point you started seeing these sponsored search results, which means it's people, companies or sellers that pay for advertising. First reaction is, well, and this would be sort of the negative against Amazon, and it's just another way to extract money from sellers. So if you think about, if you assume that all sellers are on Amazon and they're kind of captive to Amazon, the sort of the very nefarious interpretation of this would be, well, they really don't have a choice, and Amazon is just now charging. It's almost like I'm charging advertising. So they compete against each other to basically like redistribute the same consumers among each other. So it's like they're no better off, but they're just paying more money to Amazon. That's the most negative interpretation. Now, on the other hand, so I don't know what type of antitrust concern, like it does feel, okay, fair enough. It feels a little bit exploitative. Now, on the other hand, if I was Amazon, the way I would justify this is, wait a second. Part of the issue is Amazon's very large. Yes, there's lots of consumers and there's thousands of sellers. And let's say you're a new seller. So I just want to start selling on Amazon. Well, I have no chance to be, organically to appear at the top typically, because that presumably depends on previous transactions, ratings, and stuff like that. So I have like zero advantage. Now, if I know that I have a very valuable product, I should be willing to, to pay for advertising to be shown at the top. Not always, but, I should be willing to pay something in order to have a chance to, to convince consumers to look at my product. So I have to say, I find that a relatively compelling explanation, precisely because Amazon's become so large, and so there's a lot of sellers with increased competition. They could very easily say, look, we need to give new sellers a way to to reach consumers.
Fradkin, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so I think other Andrei and I agree about the core issues at hand. So right, so what's the case? The argument the case is trying to make is that Amazon is a monopoly, and how are they trying to make that argument? It's by saying that they've degraded the experience by adding all these crappy ads without seemingly it affecting their business, but then they just make a ton more money, right? So that's the role of this argument in this case. So to be clear, the case is not saying that promoting the share of advertising on the platform is what they're going after. They're going after other things. It's just that this is brought up as a piece of evidence to argue that indeed Amazon has this market power that it can then abuse. Now, on kind of the practical issue of whether promoting so much advertising is good or bad for the consumer, I think Amazon would like to make that argument that this is a great mechanism for revealing who the best sellers are, and perhaps helping new sellers. Now, in practice, I urge you to do a search for batteries on Amazon. It's not an entrant that's advertising, it's Duracell or Energizer. And so there's always this question with a huge marketplace like this. What is the representative effect? What is we can all find some searches for which it's the new sellers that are there, some searches for which it's really big sellers that are advertising, but like, what is the net effect of that on the platform? And I think this is a theme that we'll go back to, but we don't know. One of the mysteries of these platforms is it's really hard for us on the outside to tell whether they're doing something good or bad. So yeah.
Chiara, your perspective there?
Yeah, I think it's crucial to understand who advertises on these platforms, because the entry rationale, so the fact that e-commerce in general has facilitated the entry of many, many, many businesses. Now, the question is, how do you identify the good businesses? And there are at least a couple of strategies that new entrants can use to sort of signal their willingness to sell to customers. One is, well, you can start by lowering prices, right? And that is a strategy that oftentimes sellers adopt, not just on Amazon, but on many other online platforms. Well, if you charge incredibly lower prices at the beginning, you start accumulating reviews that sort of rate you with a low price, right? And the moment you then accumulate enough reputation online, you start charging higher prices. I would argue that's even a more dangerous sort of entry strategy, because now you have a reputation that's built on a bang for your buck that's sort of not the one that you are facing now as a consumer when you're facing the higher price. The other alternative is advertising, right? Like in offline, many products use advertising as a way to sort of make consumers aware of their new products, right? Or even keep them reminding them of their old products. We have billboards about Coca-Cola advertising, even on the highways. So I think it's a tool that sellers have used both online and offline, and removing it completely may be a little bit counterproductive. Now, the question is, what is the optimal level of advertising? Maybe we started from zero and we went a little bit too much advertising on Amazon. But I think it's a question for the court to say, okay, have we really gone too much towards advertising?
Can I push this just so? By the way, this is why we're having this discussion. I've already learned something I hadn't thought about on these arguments. So, what do you guys think would be the how to say the antitrust logic of this? You can't just say like advertising is exactly what Chiara is saying. Advertising is something that is pervasive, so you can't just say advertising is bad. It's just a tool, right? So, what would this fall under? Is it again? It's not it's not predation, right? It's not like I'm lowering prices to get people out. It's not. I mean, what will be the antitrust logic behind this? Like, how do we characterize this? If we were to take seriously the argument that somehow it just feels extractive, like Andrei is saying, like this is not really helping new sellers to be discovered. It's just a way to extract more money.
Well, I think one is the one that you've argued, Andrei, which is, we're not changing the outcomes for consumers. We're just extracting more of the surplus from the sellers, right?
Just rearranging. We're just basically rearranging. Like we end up in the same position. Fair enough. Yeah.
The other one is, well, if there's a negative correlation between the quality of the sellers and their propensity to advertise, right? Well, that advertisement actually can drive consumers towards worse products. Right. But I think in general, there's a positive selection on average, right? And I think there's some work on this. There's a positive selection because that signaling, it's costly to advertise.
Exactly.
And only sellers who have the expectation to sort of have a positive return from advertising, they will actually invest in it. And so that negative correlation assumption or story, I think, is a little bit unlikely.
So just to be clear, just the final point of this, like it's not just negative or positive selection, it's negative or positive selection relative to the organic search ranking, right? So the platform has a lot of data about who the good and the bad sellers are already. Then, do they need the additional signaling that comes from advertising? It's not clear. It depends. I'm sure it very much depends on the product category. Yeah.
That's a very important point, actually, Andrei. Yes. And for the large sellers, presumably the platform knows a lot. For the new entrants, I don't know how much the platform knows.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I think that's why I think this one, to me, this one's honestly, like, I mean, not like it's a defensive conclusion, but it seems tough to have a very clear, like, we'll talk about some of the other issues. And I feel like we have a clear theory. Okay, this is bad, like for this particular reasons. This is like, yeah, I can see kind of both sides. I think it feels a little bit hard to separate and to sort of to isolate what's truly bad and specific to platforms about advertising. Because you can say there's lots of bad things for advertising in other contexts, right? It doesn't have to be specific to platforms, except what Andrei just said, the thing that you already have organic search, maybe advertising is purely extractive relative to that.
So Andrei, you just mentioned that, yeah, in some of the other areas, it's a little bit more clear cut. So let's move to one of those other areas, and let's talk about one that I think is very clear cut, at least from my perspective, and that is the price parity rule. So Amazon is accused of using its monopoly power to maintain artificially high prices for consumers and preventing sellers from offering lower prices on other platforms. So the complaint alleges that Amazon's anti-discounting measures essentially punishes sellers who offer lower prices, say at rival online stores that have lower fees. And thereby they're making it difficult for these sellers to compete with Amazon. And as a result, many sellers set their price on Amazon as the price floor across the internet, leading, according to the plaintiffs, to higher prices for consumers. And so, look, this practice, to me, you ask me, seems to be rather anti-competitive on its face, but I don't know, is it? Amazon eliminated these very explicit requirements from their contracts years ago, right? So how is this still an issue and of concern? And can there be any legitimate pro-competitive reasons for this practice? And what do you think is Amazon's best argument, or what are they likely to argue? So Chiara, why don't you start us off on this one?
Yes, sure. I love this one, actually, because the argument for price parity clauses is avoid showrooming. So what does that mean, right? You go to a store, you see a product, you then find an alternative place where you can buy it for a cheaper price, and you buy it in that alternative place. And forever, we've actually done showrooming in physical stores, right? We would go to, Bed Bath and Beyond to see things that we like. Then we look for them on Amazon and we buy them, right? Now, the argument is one where Amazon doesn't want to be the Bed Bath and Beyond of the world. It wants to try and prevent their marketplace to just be a showroom that, people come, find the products, and then they buy them somewhere else, right? And there's an argument for it. Why? Because Amazon invests in a lot of, search and recommendation systems that facilitate, right, that consumers find exactly the products that they want. But if they can't monetize that somehow, that can be problematic. And a lot of the monetization that Amazon has actually comes from sales, right? Not ex ante fees, but mostly they get revenues, commission revenues, if an item sells. And so if the item sells off the platform, they don't get those commissions, right? And so that's sort of the argument that I would presume Amazon will take on this side. The other argument is that basically you are constraining sellers to not engage in healthy and consumer welfare increasing price competition, right? The fact that a seller cannot set a lower price if they sell direct, right, really constrains their ability to sell at a lower price. And why would they want to do that? Well, they may want to do that because by selling directly, they may not incur those double marginalization sort of costs, the fact that they have to pay commissions to Amazon. So there's a very clear rationale for why a seller may want to set a lower price when selling directly from their own website or from their own store, right? So removing price parity clauses has a sort of the expectation that it would decrease the prices when selling directly. And because of these competitive effect, it may actually induce Amazon to reduce their commission fees as well. So there's sort of a competitive effect that is beneficial for consumers that end up buying directly and that anyway buy from Amazon, right? This is actually nothing new, right? Like many other online marketplaces have tried to impose price parity clauses. And actually the biggest example is online travel agencies, right? Like Booking.com, Kayak, Expedia have tried to convince hotels to charge the same price for the same room when a traveler would book on Booking.com or when a traveler would book on Marriott.com, right? And we actually have some empirical evidence because Europe has actually removed, some states in countries in Europe have removed these price parity clauses in the online travel agency markets in the last 10 years or so. So there's researchers in Europe, among which Carlo Reggiani and Andrea Mantovani, who have actually tried to see whether the removal of these price parity clauses have indeed led to reduced prices. And that's not happened. That's actually in practice not happened. Why? Maybe because platforms have other ways of punishing, right, sellers for having different prices. And maybe I can give the voice to somebody else to talk about those practices.
Yeah, Andrei.
Yeah, thanks. That was a good discussion, Chiara. I had some points I wanted to make, but let me kind of follow on what Chiara was saying, which is but I actually don't think it's dispositive to say that prices didn't fall on the platforms, because the real question is whether consumers were able to find the lower price directly on the hotel's
and they did
website. Yeah,
and they did. They had data on that.
Okay. So I guess I think a big part of the FTC's argument about this is, once again, whether Amazon is truly a monopolist or not. Because if sellers have the option of just leaving Amazon and then having a lower price elsewhere and then conducting their business that way in a normal manner, then maybe it's not that big of a deal that Amazon is enforcing these price parity clauses. But otherwise, it does become quite a big deal. And I know that Chiara is bringing up empirical work, but theoretically, at least, Edelman and Wright have a paper which shows that this sort of behavior by platforms can be quite detrimental to consumers. So I wouldn't. I'd be wary of just like going off of one study in one industry with a different market power dynamic. But I do think these kind of concerns are justified. They're, we need to really dig in and have this case in order to figure out what's going on. The other thing I'd say is like just legally, I'm not a lawyer, but like whether price parity clauses are or not allowed, and in terms of the courts is something that's in contention as well. So yeah.
Hagiu, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of covers everything I thought about. So the only couple points I would add is, so number one, I think part of it's what Chiara started with. I think part of the issue is, actually, Dionne, I think you mentioned this. There's the contractual, black and white price parity, which is in a contract, versus the, we know Amazon removed that. So it no longer says in the contract they have it. But de facto, I think we suspect that, and some sellers suspect that they still enforce it. So to me, this is a very tough one because basically they can just still punish and sort of like it's an implicit signal. Hey, and the sellers kind of understands like if you have a product that's on Amazon and you price it lower somewhere else, basically your product is going to magically disappear, like not appear very high in Amazon search results. And then once you correct that, then your product magically reappears very high. I think there's kind of like some signaling there. So I think there's an interesting like enforcement issue. I don't know how I think maybe we can talk about this towards the end, like about enforcement problems. That seems like a particularly difficult one to me. And then, I have, by the way, so my a priori on this one, on price parity, I have the same as Dionne. So my a priori is like, this feels pretty anti-competitive. And if you think about, so let me try to see if I can phrase it. Part of it is basically like, if you're a platform, I tend to think, okay, it's already hard to run a platform. You should be able to impose governance rules for what the type of behavior that participants do on the platform. This is price parity is an example where you're trying to control not just what they're doing on your platform, but also outside your platform. So that feels, again, it's not just, so yes, Amazon's like, I don't know if I want to call it monopolist or not, but clearly they have a lot of influence and a lot of power, right? So they can impose certain things that other companies cannot. So it just feels a little bit unfair that you're basically saying, hey, in order for you to participate on my platform, you also have to behave a certain way outside the platform, right? I think that feels kind of a bit of an overreach.
Yeah, no, this issue will be surely hotly contested one, and we'll all be watching closely how this evolves as the litigation proceeds. Chiara, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, because I think in principle I agree, right? But because it's not part of contracts, right? Like had you had contracts, you'd be like, oh, okay, price parity clauses not legal, and you are infringing on it. But they removed them in 2013 in Europe and in 2019 in the US, right? So how would you go about proving that? Because like one example of one seller who reduced the price and disappeared from the website and then came back may not be enough to me, right?
So I completely agree. That's why I'm saying that's why I'm a little bit, I don't know what else. So just to be reasonable, right? I think it's okay. I'm in favor of saying per se, like explicit price parity, maybe it's illegal, but the contractual ones, I also don't want, the government to be spending time like I don't know how you go about this, right? It just feels like it will feel very, very impractical. So I'm with you on that. And I agree that showrooming, at least in principle, like the showrooming defense is, it can be a very reasonable one, right? They would have to argue that, listen, we invest in these technologies to provide search and discovery for consumers. We have to be able to be compensated for that, right?
So I don't know. I disagree because I think if you're a small seller and you're trying to get customers, one way you could do that is used through another platform, like advertising on Facebook. And then when you're advertising on Facebook, you're already paying Facebook for the ads, and now you have to pay Amazon again. I mean, it's a bit weird. Yeah.
Well, the government does use the term raising rivals costs.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So it's basically, you're right. So it's like you should be able. I think that's sort of where the intuition is. Listen, like it's already a dominant platform. If you should be allowed to at least try to sell somewhere else. Like it's already difficult to get. It's already difficult to get consumers to go anywhere else but Amazon, right?
And I think it's the nature of what Amazon sells, right? Like if you're just going to buy the single pair of shoes, you know, the showrooming issue is problematic. But if you're going for the shoes, for the toilet paper, for the kids' clothes, then you know the argument of showroom is a lot less strong. Why? Because you know the individual shoe store online doesn't have all of that.
Yeah, and exactly. And Amazon has plenty of incentives to invest in search and discovery because, well, to get people to come to it in the first place. I agree. I think that's fair. That's a good way to counter that.
All right, so let's move on to the next issue, and that is first-party sales and self-preferencing. So in this aspect of the complaint, it alleges that Amazon uses its dominance in two different markets. Its dominance in the online retail market to promote its own products over those of third-party sellers. Well, at least, and then of course there's online marketplace services market, which is separate. But in this particular instance, they're saying, well, look, they have these first-party sales program that allegedly allows it to sell its own products directly to consumers while also acting as a marketplace for those third-party sellers, right? So the complaint says that Amazon essentially is using the data that it collects from these third-party sellers to identify popular products, and then wouldn't you know, they create their own and they compete against those other products, and then they promote their own products over these third-party sellers. And so how is this anti-competitive? I mean, doesn't this just promote intra-brand competition? And, you know, how does it harm inter-brand competition, if at all? And what is Amazon's best argument to win on this claim? So Fradkin, let's start with you on this one.
All right. Well, so self-preferencing is kind of refers to a wide range of practices, and because Amazon has such a big blueprint, like they can self-preference in so many ways. So they can advantage their products that they sell. They can advantage the products that are fulfilled by Amazon. They can also think about like creating ad and organic search combinations so that because of self-preferencing, other brands have to advertise in order to be above them. So all these things are potential vectors of abuse. But one of the interesting parts of self-preferencing is that there is always this plausible deniability that this is all better for the consumer. And if you talk to anyone at Amazon, that's exactly what they'll tell you. They'll tell you that everything we do is for the consumer, and this is all data-driven in a way that, you know, the reason our products are at the top are just because they're the best and consumers like them the most. And so I think theoretically both are quite possible. Could be the case that it is better to rank fulfilled by Amazon higher because Amazon knows how the logistics works. They precisely know when the delivery will happen. And that's what customers like, and customers trust fulfilled by Amazon in a way that they don't others. I think once again, the question is, at what point does it go too far? Because there is a sense in which that they could tilt the scales a little bit in their favor over and beyond what helps the customer and who would notice. And they have every incentive to do so if no one can notice, because then they just get more money. And so this claim, it's going to be very hard. It's very hard to prove, is what I'd say. It's very hard to prove that something is self-preferencing versus the right ranking that just happens to be that Amazon's own products and services are at the top. And I don't know how the government could even use the data to prove this claim, other, short of, I guess, if there were emails within Amazon that said, hey, you know, we need a little more profit this quarter, so let's boost our own products a little more. You know, short of that sort of evidence, I think it's going to be very hard for them to prove that it's excessive self-preferencing that's hurting the consumer. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'll leave it. Yeah.
Can I just have a quick sort of reaction here, which is I just want to stack the deck, and maybe Chiara can take us to the other side. I mean, I think the part is because on the face of it, this sounds unfair, right? It's like, oh, you're playing on my platform, and I control the rules. Like, surely, like I can abuse that. But I think, and this is the kind of stuff you hear a lot from critics of Amazon. I think it's a little superficial, precisely because of what Andrei is saying. I mean, again, Amazon has a lot of data, so I'll give them that. The other part to me that this fails to realize, I just want to put it on the table. I mean, it's a repeated game. Like this idea that Amazon is like, I'm just going to basically like, maybe on the margin, sure, like I'll try to make some more profits on a product by putting our product first. But I think they're quite sophisticated in understanding if we start playing this game, well, number one, we're going to lose consumers. And number two, I also think they do want third-party sellers. I mean, one of the things like the share of first-party sales versus third-party sales on Amazon has been decreasing over time. So I think this is something we can look at. Amazon's goal is not to become, except if you read the FTC complaint, you get this feeling like Amazon's goal is to basically like sell every single product. They would try to increase their share. I think that's not the case. I mean, they'd rather be a platform and occasionally for some product intervene. And you have to ask yourself, why are they trying to intervene? I think partly, their explanation would be like, well, we try to intervene when, say, the third parties are not offering exactly what the customers want, and we think we can fill that gap better than they do.
Yeah, so I think this is fascinating, actually. I think there are two margins of interest, and I think the self-preferencing only touches on one of them. The first one is the risk of self-preferencing only comes in to the extent that Amazon has products that it sells directly in competition with third-party products. So if they don't have products themselves, either because they are not a retailer or because they don't have their own private brand, there's no risk of self-preferencing, right? And I think there's already discomfort, right, in the fact that Amazon sells directly in competition with third-party sellers, right? And that discomfort comes from the fact that sellers may find themselves being copied and may find themselves sort of with the less incentives to innovate. And I think that argument may be valid for certain products more than others. So what are the products where that incentive is to innovate and enter is particularly strong? Well, the products where innovation is valuable, right? Like think about maybe, clothing or fancy bags or something where, the creativity and investing in sort of developing a new, sleek, unique, sustainable product is actually worthwhile, right? But there are many other products on Amazon where that need for innovation really doesn't exist. What we really need is a reduction in costs so that we can reduce prices, right? And so Amazon coming in those markets, think about rice, think about toilet paper, right? Like how much more innovation do we need in toilet paper? We don't, right? And so there we really need low cost. And so if actually the Amazon entry allows you to get lower costs and so push competition towards lower prices, I would say that that's actually pro-competitive and beneficial. And it's behind, the fact that even physical stores have their own private labels. Then there's the question of self-preferencing, which is how do you order these things? And, Andrei have touched on it. So
great. Any other
comments? Can I
comments?
add one more?
Yes,
point?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to like a meta point about this entire discussion is like, we're assuming that Amazon knows what it's doing and is very precise and deliberate about it. But the reality is that even very smart people, including us, don't know how to study these systems very well. And so they might think they're being fair, but actually the implications of what they're doing might be harmful or beneficial. It's hard to tell. It's hard for anyone to tell, which of course raises the question of how that should be regulated. How should such opaque systems be regulated? But I do think there's sometimes a danger of like saying, oh, because Amazon has incentives in this way, they should be doing that. And I'm a little skeptical, and especially like in specific product categories, right? Like a category might be a small deal for Amazon, but it might be the entire market for that category, and it's maybe causing havoc there, in some way that's detrimental to consumers. So yeah.
The level of sophistication is a relative statement, and I would argue that Amazon is pretty sophisticated and know what they're doing, at least relative to third-party small sellers that use their platform, and so that advantage, I would say, Amazon has.
Yeah, yes, but in terms of the algorithms and what they're doing, yeah, they might think they know, but they might not.
And by the way, so Chiara, so there's an example of this which is interesting. So it's like, yes, Amazon's very sophisticated, but sometimes, like there's the Amazon, whatever, the executive team, and then like individual product managers may decide to do something different. And there's evidence of this, basically. Like, Jeff Bezos said, like, you should not do X, but there's some entrepreneur product manager said, fuck it, I'm just going to copy. I'm just going to increase my profits by copying. Like, I'm going to compete on toilet paper unfairly because I can increase my payouts for next month.
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right. Okay. So the other really overarching issue in this complaint is this issue of bundling Prime eligible with fulfillment by Amazon. And so, as I said before, of course, the complaint accuses Amazon of maintaining its monopoly in both the online superstore market and in the online marketplace services market by limiting their sellers' ability to offer their products across multiple online sales channels. So again, the FTC alleges that Amazon does this by requiring sellers who want to be eligible for Amazon Prime, right, to use Amazon's fulfillment service, use fulfillment by Amazon. And the allegation is that this is constraining the rival's ability to compete by making it more expensive for sellers to sell the same product on multiple online marketplaces. And this also artificially limits the rival's ability to gain sufficient scale and the critical mass of shoppers that they need to meaningfully compete. Okay, so what is your perspective on the impact of this conduct? Why can't the sellers just simply forego Prime eligibility? Is requiring the use of fulfillment by Amazon, can it be labeled an efficiency? Let's start with Andrei Hagiu.
Sure. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to take one side of the issue, and I'll allow Chiara and Andrei to take the other side. Okay. So this is, to me, honestly, just reading through the complaint, this felt like the weakest point of the complaints. That was my reaction. So basically, to me, the reply to that is, well, listen, if a seller wants to be eligible for Amazon Prime, that basically requires a certain level of quality, of reliability in the eyes of consumers. And Amazon understands that, say, if a consumer has a bad experience with a third-party seller, they're very likely to blame Amazon on it. So if the seller wants to be Prime eligible, well, we want to make sure that they're delivering on time and the quality of the experience is good enough, and therefore we're going to require that you also use Fulfilled by Amazon, in which case we know that you're going to ship on time. So to me, it's like this one feels like, yeah, it's a very justifiable quality control, if you will, requirements. But I'm happy to be convinced otherwise.
I love this because to me, actually, it sounded like a pretty compelling argument. And so it's a bundling argument, right? Like I'm bundling basically a quality certification in the marketplace with me selling you logistics services, right? Logistics and delivery and fulfillment services. And so basically by exploiting my monopolistic position in the marketplace, I force you to buy, right, my logistics services, my fulfillment and distribution services. So to me, that actually is a pretty compelling argument, and an argument that you know, Microsoft was dinged on many years ago when they bundled Internet Explorer in their personal computers, right? And so now I appreciate what you said, Andrei, about, you know, I'm promising, right, to the customer a level of quality, right, and a level of speed in delivery and low prices in delivery that I, as Amazon, can better control if you, seller, use my fulfillment option. But why not certifying other fulfillment options, other fulfillment and delivery options that would ensure the same level of speed and cost, which would allow maybe other shippers and other fulfillment centers to do a similar job and gain traction with sellers that use Amazon?
So let me kind of address this point of certification. So my understanding, although it could be flawed, is that actually at some point, Amazon did certify other logistics services for Prime, and then they stopped doing that. And that went along with their decision to push forward one-day shipping. And I can imagine that certifying third-party logistics services for one-day shipping would be quite difficult, and they perhaps made that calculation that would be really costly. And one argument could be, well, yes, you know, you don't have to pay for our fulfillment, but you will have to pay for our costs of certifying your fulfillment center. So, you know, there's this question of where those costs play into each other. But I will say, like, I tend to agree with Hagiu that this is one of the weaker arguments here. It does seem to me that the certification process for other parties would be very difficult for Amazon to do, and so it makes sense for them to bundle this expectation of service with their control over the service that they're giving. I think another factor to think about here, though, in terms of the role of this in the case, is that if we believe the case that Amazon is a monopolist or has enormous market power, then all of these are just ways that Amazon is trying to extract revenue from the rest of the world in a way that's less obvious than just raising prices. And, you know, we can argue left and right about whether theoretically this may or may not be justified. But if you were kind of running nefarious Amazon that just wants to, you know, maximize revenue, you would be playing all these games in order to get sellers to pay more, to get customers to pay more, but maybe not in a super salient way. And this is one way in which they could be doing it.
Andrei, do you have any remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to reply. Maybe we can keep this for discussion afterwards. I mean, so I actually think that so the comparison with Microsoft Internet Explorer is interesting. I mean, my first reaction to that, it is quite different. And by the way, I actually thought the Microsoft bundling Internet Explorer was a pretty weak case as well. Like, I mean, Microsoft did a lot of bad things. I mean, that one to me is like, I don't know if we want to go into that direction. But here it feels like, again, it's Prime is literally, it's like it's Amazon's quality. I mean, sure, they can certify third parties, right? I mean, they can use another label for third parties, but basically Prime, it basically says Amazon guarantees a certain level of service. Like, if I'm going to guarantee that, it's like, that's mine. Like, I need a certain level. It just feels fairly reasonable to have, you know, to say, listen, I need to make sure that you can deliver on time. Now, do we want to force them to also have, let's say it's a Prime minus, I don't know what you want to call it, like some other level of certification for third parties, where we say, listen, Prime is Amazon. It's like you can go to sleep, you know, at night, and you can be sure that the item delivers tomorrow. Prime minus, 75% chance it arrives tomorrow. And you know, so you can see how it gets like a little bit like, do we want to force Amazon to provide these level of certification, or to say, I'm sure like they can provide, if it was feasible, maybe they would do it, because then whatever, like there's more arguments for sellers to use them. But yeah, I mean, but I also agree with Andrei. It's like, if your view of the world is like everything they're doing is trying to like squeeze a little bit more money out of the entire ecosystem and increase their monopoly power, these are like you can view all of these through like there's small like little ways in which to do that.
But I guess,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, but I guess what's interesting here is that they're using the monopolistic position that they have in the marketplace, right, to increase their position in the logistics market, in the fulfillment and delivery market. So that's what is.
But it's on their platform. Wait, so what do you mean? So it's like, okay, Prime, this is tied to their own marketplace, right? It's like Prime is tied to their marketplace. I mean, it's.
Yes. But the fulfillment by Amazon is a part of the service that comes before that, right? It's the logistics, it's the delivery. And Amazon is growing really, really fast. I think the complaint says that Amazon now is the largest shipper in the US, right? It delivers more items than the postal service, than UPS, than FedEx, right?
Wait, and that's part of FBA. That's part of Fulfilled by Amazon. Is that what yeah, but again, that's great because presumably a lot of sellers find value in this. Now, to me, again, it's a.
But I do see your point, right? Like, I understand that, like, the Prime certificate is a certificate of guarantee of two things, right? Fast delivery and cheap delivery, right? Now, the question is, can sellers offer those two things in a different way?
By the way, they could have done so. Like, one thing to realize, to me, I would look at, so another way to look at this is the following. Amazon created Prime, and they initially, if I'm not mistaken, this was just covering stuff that it was their products, right? Because they can be sure of those. And my sense is like what they did is like said, okay, it doesn't have to be just the products that we sell first party. We can extend it to also allow third parties, like, which is actually a service to the third parties. But listen, if we're going to do that, this is a service to you. Like, you have to abide by some rules. So, I mean, and that's why, like, in that regard, that feels, I don't know, to me, that one feels pretty clear.
And yeah, just following up on that, I think an interesting case with all these platforms and the regulation is that I think almost everyone agrees that at some point this was good, right? Like, the fact that Amazon entered this industry in the fulfillment side was enormously beneficial to consumers. And the argument is kind of, at some point it kind of overexceeded its breach, and now it's kind of, you know, but it does make a harder argument. Yeah,
fair enough. It's all
general statement. I think, like, we're not arguing with the dominant position per se. Like, the complaint is not arguing with the dominant position per se. It's now arguing with the fact that Amazon may be using that dominant position to stifle even further competition, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Like, we accept monopolies in many other industries and in many other situations.
Exactly. So you guys, talked about the thing that we were going to end on. There are no questions yet. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will ask them. But let's talk about remedies. And Chiara and Andrei, Hagiu, you mentioned the Microsoft case. And I think that's a good point of comparison and to talk about remedies, because in that case, initially, remember, the judge ordered that there should be a breakup of Microsoft. Then we had a change in administration, and all of a sudden there was a settlement where Microsoft agreed to certain behavioral remedies for a period of, I don't know, 8 years or something along those lines. So my question to each of you is, when you think about what the remedy, let's assuming the government wins on one or more of these claims, right? And you need to thinking about what the remedies should be. Does it make sense to consider something structural, like breaking up, they're making them run the online superstore market separate from the marketplace services market? So does it need to be structural, retail versus platform? Should there be behavioral remedies? What are y'all's thoughts on that? Anybody can kick us off.
I'm happy to start on this one, just to say something as blunt as possible. I always thought that the idea of the structural remedy of saying you have to choose either you're 100% marketplace or 100% retailer, I think that's completely silly. Like, it just, I mean, you can go, there's so many, like, issues with this. I mean, again, I think Chiara mentioned earlier, well, first of all, are we talking like you can't be a marketplace and retailer across any product? Because the issue only is when Amazon is competing on a single product category. So surely we should be okay with Amazon basically having their own products when third parties are not offering them, And then, for some for some other products, it's just a third party. So across products, I don't see an issue with being mixed. Now you can say, well, what about within each product category? Shouldn't we say, well, for each individual product category, which I guess the government would have to define, which is, by the way, it's non-trivial. So you'd say, for this product category, you have to choose either you, Amazon, are offering that product category, or it's the third parties. But you can't be competing with the third parties in that product category. And there, I would say, we go back to what we talked before. There's this per se interdiction of having both seems pretty silly. We want competition. I think all the concerns could be resolved by behavioral remedies. So you want to make sure you want to have some rules in place that ensure competition is fair. Now, of course, I'm sure the reply to that could be well, how else how is the government going to make sure that Amazon competes fairly in categories in which they're competing with their third-party sellers? I think that's probably a fair thing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, in the meantime, we did get a question, and the question is, can you comment on whether the appropriate standard is what's good for consumers, or if the Lena Khan view, what's good for the economy and society is appropriate to apply?
First of all, I say I'm not a lawyer, so it's not a legal opinion about what's appropriate to apply. I think kind of a narrow economy and society argument can definitely make sense in the following way, right? If you're drastically raising the seller's costs, that ultimately will be passed through to the consumer in a way that is not directly hurting the consumer, but will in equilibrium. And so that should definitely be considered. And then kind of my sense is that in terms of economy and society, the appropriate place to discuss that is in Congress with new laws. That's kind of my sense, but I don't feel very strongly about this. I'm open to hearing your arguments. Yes.
Chiara?
Yeah, I think it's easier. It's already complex the way it is, that it's easier to think about consumers. Antitrust has been fundamentally focused on consumers and the assumption that competition is good for consumers. And so I would stick with that for the time being and resolve all the other issues that these large dominant sort of platforms raise while keeping constant the objective. And I'm not saying that consumers necessarily are the only objective. There's some examples in which, for example, consumers like low prices, but society may prefer, environmentally sustainable products, right? And so those may come into conflict. But I don't think that's a place for antitrust to play a role. It's a place for other parts of regulation to play a role. And so maybe Andrei has something to add, but then I wanted to go back to, the remedies.
Just a quick question, just a quick clarification. Honestly, again, I don't feel like I'm very qualified on this topic either, but just to clarify, is the argument for using, I don't think I've thought very deeply about this before, but is the argument for using, for antitrust to focus on consumers as opposed to total welfare, societal welfare, is it a practical one that it's already, like you said, it's already complicated to look at consumer welfare? If we start trying to count all kinds of welfare, it just becomes more complicated. Because on just purely based first principles, wouldn't we want to think about total social welfare?
Well, antitrust doesn't care, historical antitrust doesn't care about company profits, right? And so if we start including third-party sellers' profits in the welfare, right, then it becomes really tricky. Why do we include the profits of the third-party sellers and not the profits of Amazon in there?
Yeah, fair enough. Exactly. Right? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. You would. My sense was, I wasn't proposing to do that. It's if you do it, you should include everybody's profits and innovation. Let's say innovation incentives, both for third-party sellers, but you should also look at innovation incentives by Amazon there.
So Chiara, you want to go back to the remedies?
Yeah, which I just wanted to highlight one thing, which is in these kind of platforms, there's huge economies of scope, right? Many of these platforms are actually crossing industry boundaries, and not because they add these different verticals at random, but because there are huge complementarities. And so I think structural breakups, so structural separations, may actually lead to underexploitation of these potential benefits. So I'm, you know, to the extent that we believe that there are huge complementarities, structural breakups may be costly, right? And then it's a question of like, is it worth the cost, right? If the damage, right, to consumers from having all of this conglomerate large and dominant across many markets is very, very costly, then we're willing to incur the cost of breaking those up. I don't think that's something, for example, that Europe is considering. So Europe is thinking about some of these remedy, not as in an exposed way, like the US is thinking with this lawsuit, but in an ex ante way with the Digital Markets Act that was passed last year. Some of these requirements, right? No self-preferencing, no price parity clauses, those are actually there, right? As obligations that companies like Amazon, like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft cannot engage in, right, ex ante, right? And so maybe you can just say, just don't do it. Now, the big challenge is policing and monitoring those behavior, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think maybe this is a very academic answer, but I do think part of the solution is more auditing. I think one of the key ways in which regulation is working in this industry is just the threat of being sued is constraining behavior a lot. And maybe in a bad way, actually. Maybe it's reducing innovation, but that is currently what it's doing, is that people, in these companies are scared of doing lots of things because they might get sued. But we know a lot more about like what is and isn't a problem if we could compel not data sharing, certainly, but also requiring specific sorts of experiments and other kind of analyses to be done in a way that informs society. And kind of this goes back to the EU argument. If these companies are societally important in a way that other companies are not, then perhaps they have less of a right to confidential business information, and more of that information should be shared with the public. And I think that could be an interesting way to go.
So, and Andrei?
I know we have like 1 minute left. I don't want to sort of open another can of worms like with 1 minute left, but I think this to me is the most interesting question here. It's exactly what you guys said. Like it's how do you think about the regulator requirements about use of proprietary data, right? And there's lots of interesting questions. Like, first of all, what exactly is the proprietary data that is relevant here? And should we have some sort, so there's auditing, which again, I tend to agree, like auditing would be great if it was possible. The other option to consider would be to say, well, if you're worried that Amazon's using proprietary data, say to compete, like to copy whatever to compete, it's like, why not say they just need to release that data to whatever relevant data it is, that should be made public to all third-party sellers, and everybody competes, on an equal footing.
Very interesting. I think we could probably end on that very provocative note. And I just want to thank our wonderful panelists here for a robust discussion of the pros and cons of the FTC and the state attorneys general antitrust lawsuit against Amazon. We want to thank each of you for joining us today. And thanks again to our wonderful panelists. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dionne.
Thanks.